Hello, everybody. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Manor Podcast. I'm your co-host, Roger Bodee, joined as always by my best friend and co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael, I'm doing peachy today. How are you doing today?
Oh, you took it before I had a chance. I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to talking about these new Uprising cards. There's a lot of cool ones in the set.
Spoilers. So yes, today Michael and I will be talking about our picks for the top 10 cards in Classic Constructed from Uprising. Once again, if a card is higher on my list, after Michael announces it, I will announce what place it is on my list and we'll talk about it from there. We'll also be fully reading out all the card details as we announce what we're picking and explaining in great detail why we picked them.
Let's get started.
Okay, Michael, did you have any honorable mentions before we start with our top 10?
I did. My honorable mention was Flame Call Awakening. It is a red common draconic attack. Costs 1. It attacks for 3, blocks for 2. And it says, when you attack with Flame Call Awakening, if you put another red card this turn, you may search your deck for a Phoenix Flame, reveal it and put it into your hand, and then shuffle.
And you said this was a common card?
This is a common.
How can a common card possibly be one of the top 10 most powerful?
Well, based on the way Fi plays, and even Dromai, I think this might be reasonable in depending on if Dromai chooses to play Phoenix Flames or not. But specifically in Fi, it's going to be really important to find your second and maybe even your third Phoenix Flame, and this just tutors your deck to find them. So I think it'll be quite powerful to be able to get those flames out of your deck and able to play with them.
That makes sense. Although, for as much grief as I was just giving you for picking a common card, my honorable mention is also a common card. My honorable mention is Billowing Mirage. I believe this card will be played in all 3 colors, but the red version of Billowing Mirage is a 1 cost. When you attack with Billowing Mirage, transform up to 1 ash you control into an Aether Ashwing Go Again. It has 3 power and 3 defense. So this just seems like it'll be a great filler card for the go wide strategies that I envision Dromai to more want to utilize in Classic Constructed. Being able to make one of your ash tokens into an Aether Ashwing, follow up this attack with that Ashwing attack. Seems like a powerful effect and an effect that you'll want a lot of in your deck. I could be wrong, but this is why I put it on my list, because it seems like an effect, if you're going to want it, you're going to want a lot of it. And it being a 3-block class card seems like it's going to be something that Dromai is going to gravitate towards heavily in Classic Constructed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That card didn't make my list, but I think your logic for putting it there makes a lot of sense. My biggest concern when I was looking at Dromai cards specifically was how you're actually going to create the ash, because over the course of the game it's very inefficient to pitch red cards, so I was worried that you needed to find other ways to create ash other than just pitching red cards.
Yeah, that's fair. I haven't had a lot of experience with playing, considering I did not go to Las Vegas, so I'm not 100% familiar with the play patterns of Dromai, but like I said, just complete shot in the dark speculating just seems like an effect that she might want if she can generate these ash tokens effectively.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, Michael, what was your 10th most powerful card in Uprising?
My 10th most powerful card is another common. This card I don't think is going to be amazing or all over the place, but it will have spots, and I think it will see play in some spots, and in those spots it does see play, I think it will be quite good. My number 10th card is Oasis Respite. This comes in all 3 colors, but I'm specifically going to read the red here. It is a 1-cost generic instant that says prevent the next 4 damage that would be able to target hero this turn by a source of your choice. If you have less life than each other hero, if they have less life than each other hero, they may gain 1 life. So basically this card looks very similar to Steadfast, which at red is 3 cost for 6 prevention. This is 1 cost for 4 prevention, which is the same rate where you're spending 1 card for 3 and then 1 resource per 1 extra, so it costs 4. But it also has this little upside where you can also gain a life when you're lower than them, so that makes it more efficient than Steadfast. And it's also easier to for the defensive Guardian decks or anyone that's trying to play defense with resources on the opponent's turn, to have 1 floating resource rather than 3. I think outside of Anathos decks, this card is just strictly better than Steadfast.
The reason why this card didn't make my list was because spending resources on your opponent's turn for the vast majority of decks is not something they're actively looking to do at any point in time. And even doing things like using Vaindal's Spring Tunic activation, once it has 3 counters, in order to play cost effects like this, is not exactly where you want to be. My experience is thinking of cards like Reduce to Rune Chant and Viscerai when you don't have any Rune Chants in play. Paying for that card is a miserable experience, as well as paying for cards like Steelblade Shunt and Warrior, where even though it's a very efficient defense reaction and you're getting that extra ping off of weapon attacks, and its block rate is high for only spending one resource, committing that one resource on your opponent's turn can dramatically hamper your offense and put you in these really awkward situations where you're not blocking effectively well over the course of the turn, or you're blocking effectively well, but you're not gaining any tempo advantage out of it because it's hindering your offense so much more dramatically.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Pitching a card to play just the one cost card and not using the other two resources means, or is like just very inefficient, very bad. I think specifically the two heroes I expect us to see play in are Oldheim and Icelander, because they both are actively spending resources on the opponent's turn. So it plays nicely with Crown of Seeds and also plays nicely with Icelander.
Potentially Prism too.
Yeah, that's true. That's another one. Well, so what was your number 10?
My 10th most powerful card was Powerful Blue Majestic in the Wizard class. I picked Tome of Duplicity. Tome of Duplicity is a blue. It costs 3 resources. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck, then banish one. If it's a non-attack action card, you may play it this turn, though it were an instant. It has 2 defense, no attack power. I picked this card because the Wizard class is always looking to access for more cards, more resources, and more abilities to play their cards at instant speed. Right now, since it's a blue, Icelander is able to play this from Arsenal at instant speed on their opponent's turn, as well as Kano can play this at instant speed anytime he reveals it off of his activated ability from his hero power. I expect that more Wizards will be printed down the line and will want to play this card and these kinds of effects because it's filtering and access to the cards that you want to be playing at instant speed. Most of the time Wizard cards do not have go again, so they need to be played at instant speed in order to chain them together. And having access to powerful blues in particular is something they want because they're also very resource hungry when they are trying to play these cards. So it both functions as a way to dump excess resources into and be a resource all in one card, and it seems exactly like everything the Wizard class wants to be doing.
That makes a lot of sense. The card is not a card that was on my list, but it does really fit the Wizards game plan of being a good resource card and also kind of extending those non-attack actions that do not have go again, those turns that just involve actions. The reason this card didn't make it on my list is because I'm not sure it quite gets there on rate. Being a block 2 means it's a little bit weak, and then when you're trying to play the card, it costs 3 resources and a card, and just gives you back a card at the action point you spent on it. So you're basically having to trade 2 cards for that 1 card that you get to play as an instant.
Right. The reason why it not having go again was in my consideration that you're playing this at instant speed specifically. I don't think this is a card that you want to be playing just during your main phase, although it is a card you could be playing on your main phase. And I think the fact that you could just use this as a filtering effect when you're specifically digging for a potential finisher or a combo piece, as well as being able to activate it, as well as being able to activate Kano's ability on the stack, and then look at the top 2 cards, banish, and effectively being able to know exactly what 2 cards you're going to banish and take full advantage of any timing interactions of playing those 2 cards between the gap of banishing one or banishing the other.
Sorry, so you get to banish 1 to the card's effect, and then the other one is left on top of your deck.
And then would be banished by Kano's effect and then could also be played at instant speed.
I see. That makes sense.
Moving on to the 9th most powerful card, what was on your list, Michael?
My 9th most powerful card is Rise from the Ashes. It is a rare. It comes in all 3 colors, but specifically I'm looking at the red again. It's Draconic Ninja action. It says the next Draconic or Ninja attack action card you play this turn gains +3 attack, and you may return a Phoenix Flame from your graveyard to your hand. Go again. So the reason I rank this card so highly is you can pick up Phoenix Flame and it gives it +3 damage. So this is basically a 0 for 4 with Go Again, as long as you have a flame in your discard. 0 for 4 is a rate that we are quite happy to have in our decks, usually 0 for 4 with Go Again. It helps extend chains if you play it at the start, and then you'll have that Phoenix Flame. So just one of the most efficient go wide cards in the set, I believe, for Ninja. And we'll get to this later, but there are cards that benefit from having Phoenix Flames on the stack, and this synergizes nicely with those cards.
Importantly, Vi can start with Phoenix Flames in his graveyard, correct?
If I can start with 1 Phoenix Flame in his graveyard.
Right, so you should be able to almost always have this effect be activated even from turn 0 of the game.
Well, you really want to find the second one before using this effect, because once you've played 3 Draconic attack actions, you can return 1 for free with Vi's ability from your graveyard to your hand. So this card really only starts to look great once you've gotten the second Phoenix Flame in your discard pile.
Gotcha, that makes sense. This card did not make my list. My ninth most powerful card is Hypothermia. Hypothermia is also a majestic, so it only comes in one color. So it is a blue for 0 cost. It is Ice Action Affliction Aura, which is a new type of action we're getting with Uprising. It states, an affliction enters the arena under an opposing hero's control. Attacks you control can't gain Go Again. This does not affect attacks that naturally have Go Again. At the beginning of your end phase, destroy Hypothermia. The reason why I have this card rated so highly is because the ability to flash this in with Icelander, as well as being the exact kind of disruptive effect that ice heroes want out of their cards, is going to mess up a lot of the go wide strategies or the aggressive decks that they can sometimes struggle into. Particularly, I also think this card could be playable in Lexi because it's blue, and she does not want her opponents having a lot of powerful go wide or a lot of attacks coming back at her after she's doing her thing. She's just trying to be as disruptive as possible on her turn. So I can see a lot of play patterns where you flip this up, give your opponent a Frostbite, play the Hypothermia from Arsenal, load up your Arsenal, attack with even more disruptive arrows, and then your opponent has Frostbite, Hypothermia. So that just seems like a very powerful disruptive effect that is exactly what Icelander, Lexi, and to a certain extent even Oldhim wants to be doing, although it doesn't block for 3.
Yeah, this doesn't prevent all sources of Go Again, it just prevents things from gaining Go Again. So for that reason, it didn't make my list, because it's not just like generically good against all sources of Go Again. It does line up well against quite a lot of things in the format. Voltaire can't give Go Again, Lexi's ability can't give Go Again, Chain's ability, well, I guess Chain's gone. Prism and Dromai's abilities can't give Go Again to things. Briar's embodiments of lightning can't give Go Again. So it does hit quite a lot of things, but it doesn't generically hit every action with Go Again.
Right, but I think it affects a lot of actions. You're also missing Prism. The auras can't gain Go Again. The illusionist attacks can't gain Go Again, as well as effects like Scar for a Scar, Enlightened Strike. These kind of effects can't gain the Go Again effects that their cards would naturally say that they gain under certain conditions or certain abilities. They're just completely turned off from having access to those abilities on those cards. So I get what you're saying with not preventing all Go Again actions, but I think it prevents enough Go Again actions, and there are enough setup cards like Malvern Skies out of Runeblade or Embodiment of Lightning tokens out of Briar for these attacks that gain Go Again through other ways. And attacks gain Go Again, I feel, is more ubiquitous than just strong attacks that naturally have Go Again built into them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I keep thinking about it, and there's more and more cards that just come to mind that it stops. It stops Lightning Surge, and it stops Entwined Lightning also. It does hit quite a lot of cards.
Art of War.
Mm-hmm. Snapdragon Scalers.
Yeah, look at that. This card's broken. Okay, Michael, what is your 8th most powerful card?
My 8th most powerful card is another common. I think that there are a lot of ice commons that are all going to see play in Icelander, but I think this is the best of them. And my number 8 is Cold Snap, specifically the blue version. I'll go ahead and read it. It is a 1-cost ice action. It blocks for 2. And at blue, it says, target hero may pay 1. If they do not, freeze a card in their arsenal or an ally they control until the start of your next turn. And if Cold Snap is played from Arsenal, draw a card. The reason I rated this so highly is because Polar Blast already saw play in Blitz Icelander, and the main reason you're using this is to pay 1 on your opponent's turn to give them a Frostbite, cycle it, and draw, or cycle it as in drawing a new card, and then enabling the new weapon to be able to attack your opponent for 3. Spending 1 resource and a card to draw a card and get a Frostbite is a deal that you would be happy to take some of the time. But then on top of that, the freezing their arsenal unless they pay 1 will also sometimes just mess up your opponent's turn too. I think this card just gets there efficiently enough on rate. It's a blue that cycles, and importantly, it's an ice card for a lot of Icelander's powerful ice fusion effects.
I can definitely see how the cycling mitigates the downside of this card. I'm just envisioning circumstances where your opponent either doesn't have a card in Arsenal, or their first action that they take on their turn is playing their Arsenal card. So if your opponent, for instance, has a powerful non-attack action that they want to go lead with or play, they can just lead with that, and then this card's effect is reduced to draw a card, give your opponent a Frostbite token for 1 resource. Well, it is still replacing itself, and it's not the worst rate in the world. I just didn't think it would be that powerful. And outside of Icelander, looking at heroes like Lexi and Oldhim, the other ice heroes in the format, I don't think either of them would be too happy to play this effect. Potentially maybe Lexi, although I still think Polar Blast would be a stronger action for her.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's probably almost exclusively an Icelander card, but I think it will be a 3 of in every Icelander deck.
Okay, I could see that. That card was not on my list, by the way.
What was your number 8?
My 8th most powerful card is also the rarest card in Uprising. It's the fabled Blood of the Drakai. So Blood of the Drakai is not a playable card, it is strictly only a resource card, and it is legendary, so you may only have 1 Blood of the Drakai in your deck. Its text is, when you pitch Blood of the Drakai, the next 3 Draconic cards you play this turn cost 1 resource less. It is a Draconic resource gem. The reason why this card is on my list is because it does technically have the potential to pitch for 4 total resources, because when you pitch it, you are going to generate the resource, the red resource that it creates, and then reduce the next 3 Draconic cards that you're playing should they have costs. There will be times where you do have 3 other cards that cost 1 resource that will get value out of this, as well as also being able to fulfill a lot of the red requirements that both Fae and Dromai want out of their pitches and cards in their deck in general. So that's why it's on my list.
This is a card that did actually make my list, so we have our first overlapping card here. I rated it as 5th for a lot of the same reasons as you did, but I also think it is almost going to be vital for Dromai, because the fact that it pitches for what can be as many as 4 resources and also gives you an Ash, which, as I said earlier, I was pretty concerned about making sure you have efficient ways to get Ash in your deck. I think this card just is very efficient and gives you Ash, which is exactly what you want to be doing in Dromai.
Well, I'm glad we're finally on the same page around here, Michael.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was your 7th most powerful card?
So my 7th most powerful card is Invoke Dominia. Invoke Dominia is a 4-cost Draconic Illusionist action invocation. It's legendary, so you can only put 1 in your deck. And it says, transform target Ash you control into Dominia, go again. And it blocks for 3. And Dominia is a dragon ally. It has 4 attack and 4 health. And it says, whenever Dominia attacks a hero, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a red card, look at their hand and banish a card from it. I think this card is the best of the legendary dragons. Costing 4 is pretty achievable without having an insufferable amount of blues in your deck. You can just have 1 blue and either a tunic counter or a red and play this reasonably efficiently. The other dragons costing 5 or 6 seems like a lot in comparison to this 4 cost. And then looking at your hand and peeling a card is an extremely powerful effect. We talked about random discard being really annoying and powerful in our last episode. Well, targeting discard is even more so. So far, they've been extremely careful with printing that kind of effect in the game. Pariah and Phantasmaclasm both replace the card that they take away. This just takes the card away, and if it lives for the turn, it can do it again the following turn. So I think Invoke Dominia is going to be very powerful and a part of, as long as Dromai decks include any number of blues, I think this card will see play in them.
I believe you and I are looking at different rates on the if. I think I am more looking towards the downside of this card for if it does not hit and reveals a non-red card, like one of the blues you're needing to cast this card. There's no ways for Dromai to opt her deck naturally, and I don't think she's going to put cards like Whisper of the Oracle blue necessarily in her deck, although I could be wrong. However, when this card misses, when it does not reveal a red card, it doesn't do anything, as well as the times when your opponent's hand is just foolproof in killing this on a crackbag, specifically if their weapon is able to contribute to dealing the 4 damage back to Dominia, and as well as a lot of 0/4 effects like Snatch, Scar for a Scar, Illuminate, things like that will also all get the hit triggers after hitting this card on the swing back as well. I think it's going to be very rare that your opponent's hand is going to be so vulnerable that Dominia's ability will even be able to protect herself in a real way.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think Dominia will frequently protect herself, but it's basically a must kill, and the fact that it comes in for 4 damage and then absorbs 4 damage and takes a card, and assuming this takes 3 cards to play, a blue, a red, and casting it, you're basically getting 8 damage for 3 cards and taking the best card out of your opponent's hand.
Sometimes taking the best card. As a person who's played a lot of Sonata Arcanics, I think you're not used to playing with cards that have a fail rate.
That's fair. I am not really accounting for how often this card misses, which I think, even without the opting card effects, I think isn't going to be too frequent. I would expect it to be less than 30% that you miss, but that is still a very real fail rate.
I was thinking around that 30% sweet spot, that between 30 and 20%, where the cards are working the vast majority of the time, but are still frustratingly enough failing that when you really need it to connect, or you really want its ability, when you need it most, it's going to fail. 30% of the time, it misses every time, Michael.
So what was your number 7?
My 7th most powerful card is That All You Got? That All You Got is a generic defense reaction that blocks for 3, is another majestic, and only comes in yellow, so it pitches for 2 resources. That All You Got has the text, while this is defending an attack action with power 2 or less, when that combat chain closes, draw a card. I feel like this is going to become ubiquitous in controlling and mid-range style, and maybe even aggressive decks against the go wide, very aggressive decks that are trying to play 2, 3, 4, 5 chain links, especially against 5 Fly, Katsu, Dromai potentially, and even against the Rune Blades that are attacking you with Rosetta Thorn at the end of the chain link, being able to at least mitigate that 2 damage by getting your card back is very powerful, as well as being a yellow, so it's still a functional resource card most of the time when you need it to be. And if you ever just need it to cover up an effect at instant speed, it still has a reasonable block value of 3 to get a decent amount of value out of it, even when you're not getting your card back necessarily. So I think this card has become a sideboard staple in Flesh and Blood.
I agree, and that's why I put That All You Got as the 4th most powerful card in the set. Blocking 2 and drawing a card is just an insane rate on a card. You're just getting basically 2 free life, and the card's replacing itself. For a while, I sung the praises of Sonata being 1 damage and drawing a card because I undervalued the fail rate on it. But this one is, assuming your opponent gives you the opportunity to block 2 with this, you're blocking 2 and drawing a card, which is, it's just very powerful and not really comparable to anything else we've seen.
Exactly. And even when you're needing an extra resource card, I don't know why you would ever pitch Sonata Arcanix, but you are only pitching Sonata for a red. It only comes in red, where this is still at least also a yellow, so it's a respectable resource generation rate.
Yeah, its fail cases of both being a block 3 and being a yellow are both like very reasonable, so I agree.
And in Prism, I could also see this being a really big deal because it's a yellow, and being able to just easily block just a random aura that's attacking you for 1 and filter your hand a little bit to try to get an edge in the matchup that way. So it's gaining you a life, filtering your hand, as well as being that yellow. So it checks all the boxes that I think Prism especially is going to want. Okay, Michael, I have to say, I'm getting a little scared that all my high picks are a lot of your low picks, so I feel like I am way overestimating some of the power level of my cards, but I guess we'll see when we get there.
Okay, well, I think this one will probably make your list. My number 6 most powerful card in Uprising is Tome of Firebrand. Tome of Firebrand is a red Draconic instance. It costs 1 resource, and it says play Tome of Firebrand only if you control 4 or more Draconic chain links, and when you play it, you draw 2 cards. So this card is kind of difficult to make work. It requires you to play 4 or more Draconic chain links, or have 4 or more Draconic chain links. And the payoff of drawing 2 cards for 1 resource without costing an action point is quite high, but this fail case is it doesn't block and it's a red. The reason I rated this card so highly is I think both Phi and Dromai are both very capable of getting to that 4 chain links quite easily. Phi, with his ability to return a Phoenix Flame from the graveyard every turn for 0 resources, just adding 1 additional chain link, and his weapon that gives 2 cost for a 3 power Draconic chain link gives him access to 2 easy additional Draconic chain links every turn. So you only really need to come up with 2 more and a blue to make this card work in Phi. And then Dromai, you rated the one that creates Aether Ashwings very highly. I think it is reasonable that there is a Dromai deck that creates a lot of Aether Ashwings over the course of the game, and once you're doing that, it's very easy to turn this card on by attacking with several of them in 1 turn.
This card did not make my list. I agree that the Draconic classes are going to be able to get to the 4 chain links, maybe not the majority of their turns necessarily, but a good amount of the time. I guess in my mind, how are you getting to that 4 chain link as well as having the extra resource to have this card? So that means you're saying you need the resources to play your cards and to get to that chain link, the cards themselves to attack, and then that extra resource to then draw these 2 cards. I guess drawing 2 cards is always good. I shouldn't downplay the drawing 2 cards because that effect's just always bonkers. But I guess I just had trouble envisioning, especially without having played this set or these heroes, their ability to get to that 4+ chain link and still have that extra resource in order to play this card.
Yeah, having played basically just the games of Uprising Limited that I've played, it did not seem very uncommon at all to hit 4 chain links in limited decks and still have resources and cards left. I had a reason why I had 5 turns go to 5 or 6 chain links, and I think constructed decks that are built around this card will just easily reach that point because they're going to be more refined. They're going to have more of the 0 cost Draconic attacks, and yeah, I think this card will be enabled a lot of the time.
But they're also going to be facing way more disruption and ability to mitigate this card's upside at the end of the game. If you're just scrapping it out, brawling, you're forced to block in circumstances. This also seems like a card that can lose you a lot of games in those kinds of situations as well. And it also feels like a card that can, be that dreaded card that just gets stuck in your arsenal, where it has this powerful effect. And you're like, okay, I can't play it this turn, but I'll put it in my arsenal because it's not a good resource card and it doesn't block. And then for the rest of the game, you just kind of get in this awkward spot where your opponent has really threatening on-hit triggers triggers, or they're giving you frostbites, or they're playing crippling crushes, even though Starvo's gone. Maybe you're playing against Oldtime and Guardian and stuff like that. So I do see the potential in this card, but I evaluate it closer to a card like Tome of Findall or Tome of Divinity, where it's definitely very powerful and does have upsides, but I feel like they're very cautious with these effects, and I expect and would hope that this card is not going to be any different than those.
Yeah, that's fair. We'll have to see. I could definitely see it being a card that is awkward against the Ice Hero specifically, and if Ice Heroes are a big portion of the metagame, maybe this card doesn't get there, or it's a card that's frequently boarded out.
Okay, my sixth most powerful card is Frost Hex. I am keeping on pace with every single card on my list so far is a Majestic, and this card is also Majestic. It is a blue that costs 3. It is Ice Wizard, also an Affliction Aura that blocks for 3. It is Icelander Specialization. Frostbites you control have at the beginning of your end phase, this deals 1 arcane damage to you. The reason why this card is on my list is because I think it's going to be the primary way in which Icelander will look to close out games. It creates really interesting tension where once this is in play, Icelander has the choice of either using her Frostbite tokens to be disruptive and try to put their opponent on the back foot that way, or using her Frostbite tokens to force her opponent to take damage by playing her cards at instant speed after their opponent has already done their thing, as well as being able to stack these. So once you get 2 of these in play, Frostbite tokens are insane value, always dealing 2 arcane damage to opponent at the end of their turn. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of game states where against Icelander, you can't play the last card in your hand. You kind of always have to keep 1 card back or this extra resource in order to mitigate the threat of these frostbites just coming in and dealing arcane damage to you. If she generates 2, 3, 4 frostbites at the end of your turn after you've dumped your hand, you don't have any resources left to even potentially try to mitigate this arcane damage. That really adds up and can really end games really quickly. So I think this is going to be the primary way, like I said, that Icelander's going to choose to close out games, and I really like the flexibility that it gives in her game plan, whether it be to push damage or be disruptive.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and that's why I rated this card as number 3. It's a very powerful aura that stays in play and chips in damage anytime the opponent can't clear frostbites. It stacks with itself extremely nicely, and I think this is actually the card that's going to help Icelander avoid being fatigued, is against these like slow controlling fatigue decks. You can stack multiple frost hexes on them and then end the game by using these frost hexes in combination with giving them several frostbites and emptying their hands. That will just be Icelander's way to avoid being fatigued, I believe. On top of that, it is ice, it is blue, and it blocks for 3, which are all things Icelander is very interested in.
Absolutely. It just is everything she could ever possibly want in a card.
So I've gone through my 6, my 5, my 4, and my 3. So I think it makes sense to just have you kind of go up your list to catch up with me.
Okay, we're rounding it out now, Michael. I can see why you didn't rate these very powerful cards as high as I did. They're pretty subtle, and you kind of have to have a high mind to truly appreciate the power level of these cards, but we'll talk about these in a second. So my 4th most powerful card is Erase Face. Erase Face is a generic attack action, also Majestic, that only comes in red and costs 2 resources. It has 6 power and 2 defense. Erase Face says, when Erase Face hits a hero, cards and tokens they own lose all class and talent types until the end of their next turn. I think this is one of the most devastating hit triggers in the game, and I think it's being overlooked by a lot of players at the moment. This would have been an insane card against Starvo and Chain. Against Starvo, because Starvo no longer has the elemental type of cards to reveal. He just has no hero ability while after being hit by this card. Chain no longer has Runeblade cards for his hero ability to give Go Again to, as well as Malvern Skies not giving Go Again to, and still Viscerai and Briar right now. Prism, Luminaris completely turned off. Her auras that she has on the battlefield are no longer Illusionist. Viscerai, his hero ability, no longer generates Rune Chance because he's no longer playing Runeblade cards to generate the Rune Chance anymore. Oldtime no longer has defensive reaction abilities because he can't pitch Ice or Earth cards in order to activate them, as well as turning off Winter's Wail because he can't pitch Ice cards in order to generate the Frostbite token to satisfy Winter's Wail ability. And Dromai no longer has Go Again on her Draconic attacks because none of her attacks are Draconic anymore, as well as having just a slew of other cascading effects with the kind of synergies that all these heroes are relying on to play the game of Flesh and Blood. So I envision this being an incredibly ubiquitous card, especially since it's a generic, for pushing this really powerful on-hit trigger, and I think this might even be along the lines of Command and Conquer. It's just a very, very, very powerful effect that I don't think is getting enough credit at the moment.
Yeah, this card did not make my list, but that is mostly because I think the times you would want this card are times that you would want Command and Conquer. And Command and Conquer, I believe, does what this does, but better. Having 3 block and also turning off defense reactions just makes it more applicable in more spots. And just having such a commonly played card that's likely just better most of the time makes me think this card won't actually see that much play. What you said about it being quite good against Prism makes a lot of sense, though. I think this card is significantly better than Command and Conquer against Prism.
Right, and you've played a good amount of Lexi now. How good of an effect was Sleep Dart to your surprise? I think that's a card that also a lot of people sleep on, but once they realize whether they're about to be hit with it, realize the true power behind that card, where this card pseudo does that for a lot of these hero abilities, like I said, because they all are so reliant on these card types, whether they be class or talent.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It does interact profitably with a lot of things in the game, and for that reason, it makes sense that you rated it so highly.
And it's an effect that I think is only going to get better as time, as we see more classes and talents. I would hope LSS is going to print more class and or talent cards that are going to synergize well in heroes decks. So this text on this card, I feel, will only get better with time.
Yeah, this could definitely be a card that I look back on and see it not on my list and I feel kind of not great about. But I do think that it does have very tough competition with Command and Conquer. And similar to what you were saying about, there are a lot of heroes that this is good against. There's not a lot of heroes that just want a 2-cost generic action attack in their deck because it doesn't have that type or talent.
Right, but there are a lot of heroes that were always playing Command and Conquer.
Arguably more than there should have been, but I agree.
Right, and Command and Conquer has lost some of its luster as time goes on, but I genuinely believe that this card is better than Command and Conquer and is more disruptive in the long run because it's always applicable, not just to the times when your opponent has either a defense reaction or an arsenal, because when your opponent has no arsenal, your Command and Conquer is bad. It's just a bad card because your opponent just has the ability to say, okay, you have no go again, you have no action point anymore, you just hit me for 6 damage, I didn't have an arsenal, so that's it, that's all you did, you hit damage. Where this card always has an effect. It is always going to trigger if it hits and take away something from your opponent in a disruptive way.
You said it will always take something away from your opponent, but I'm not sure if that's true. Like, there are definitely heroes in the game that don't really care that much about the types of their cards. Like, there have been Lexi builds with very low elemental counts. Oldheim, you said that his Winter's Well loses the Frostbite, but that's not like a huge loss if if instead of swinging for 4 on a Frostbite, you're swinging for 4. This on-hit trigger was not particularly impactful.
I see what you're saying where it has downside. I definitely agree where it has downside, but I still think it has enough upside against enough heroes and has enough future upside against future heroes that it will be one of the most powerful cards in Uprising and all in Flesh and Blood. And if I'm wrong, I guess I'll just have to erase face.
All right, so that was your number 4.
Am I good to go to my number 3 now?
Yeah, what was your number 3?
Number 3 is a red Majestic. It costs 0. It blocks for 3. It is a draconic action aura. It's Burn Them All. Burn Them All says, go again. Once per turn, when a dragon you control attacks, it deals 1 arcane damage to each opposing hero. At the beginning of your end phase, put a raise counter on Burn Them All and destroy it unless you banish red card from your graveyard for each raise counter on it. This, once again, is my thinking of going into this go wide Dromai deck where she's going to want to be attacking with a lot of Aether Ashwings, and the primary way that I think she's going to get value out of most of her dragons is going to be this attack with them, expect your opponent just to pop it with either a 6-power attack or just kill it on their own turn by attacking it, and just pushing this into 1 split damage of arcane is going to be a very powerful way for her to push more damage than she necessarily would have been able to otherwise. And we've seen time and time again, this ability to split physical and arcane damage is always a very powerful effect. Primarily, we've seen it mostly in Rune Blades, although we have seen it a little bit in Illusionist to this point with Merciful Retribution, where whenever prisms, auras, or heralds were being popped, it would also ping this point of arcane damage across, as well as going to her soul. While this doesn't generate any extra resources, I think this card's a lot easier to keep around over a longer game and has the potential to stay around for 2, 3, 4 turns, and you really only need to get that 4 arcane damage out of it for it to be at rate, and then anything else above that is going to be extremely potent in the Dromai decks. So that's kind of why I valued it so highly.
This is a card that did not quite make my list, but was one of the ones I was very strongly considering. It's not hard to imagine this dealing 4 damage over the course of the game, and there's going to be times where it deals 5 or potentially even 6 over the course of the game. So it's definitely a very powerful card. The reason it didn't quite make my list is that the times that you draw multiples of it, the second copy of it's not going to be very good. And then when you draw it extremely early in the game or extremely late in the game, it's not going to be particularly great there either. So I think like the windows this card will deal 4 or more damage in it aren't as common as you would expect them to be. And it wouldn't surprise me if lists end up playing only 1 or 2 copies of this, just because it can be awkward to draw in multiples and you only want it towards the middle of the game.
Why don't you want it at the end of the game?
Because if you play on the second to last turn of the game, if you play an attack with a dragon, you deal 1. Then the following turn you attack with the dragon and deal 1 more, and then the game is over. So it only dealt 2 damage.
Right, but it was threatening that split damage, which at the end of the game is usually very hard for decks to interact with because they're committing 1 card to physically block and then as well as 1 card usually to pitch for resources in order to block. If they even have Arcane Barrier against you, which isn't even a given, because how many decks are going to think to bring in that Null Rune or that Arcane Barrier?
Yeah, by the end of the game, I meant specifically like below 10 life. I didn't mean when they're at 1 or 2 life. When they're at 1 or 2 life, this card's like reasonable, but like if they're at like 8 life, then spending a card to deal 1 damage and they're going to swing back for lethal against you is like not a great place to be.
Well, if they're swinging back for a lethal, then they're not, you just block with your hand and then you swing back with your dragon, banish a red card from your thing, you're dealing a physical and an arcane damage, so that's split damage. So you're probably getting 1 point across, and then they're either committing their resource to either attack your dragon, which you're fine with because you're at such a low life total, or they're spending their resource attacking you, which you just block, and then you have this free permanent on the board dealing split damage.
I just think the game doesn't like continue long enough when a player is at 10 life most of the time that this card is going to give enough.
I guess we will have to see. So how many cards do you have left on your list now, Michael? Because I'm down to my top 2.
I am also at my top 2.
Okay, what is your second most powerful card in Uprising?
My second most powerful card in Uprising is Phoenix Form. This is a red 0-cost Draconic Ninja action attack. It attacks for 3, blocks for 3, and it says, if you control 1 or more Phoenix Flames, Phoenix Form has Go Again. If you control 2 or more, it has +2. And if you control 3 or more, it has, when this hits a hero, draw 3 cards. Now, I think this card is mostly going to be used to hit that second ability where you need 2 Phoenix Flames and you get a 0 for 5 Go Again. That is an extremely good rate, and a card that blocks for 3 and does that is very powerful. The third mode on it probably won't come up very often, but when it does, if you aren't able to block this card out, you're basically going to lose the game, and so you'll have to spend a lot of resources to try to block it. I think with the tools Fi has, including starting the game with Phoenix Flame in the discard pile and the Flame Call Awakening to help tutor out the second Phoenix Flame or the third Phoenix Flame, I think this card will be reasonably easy to enable the 0 for 5, and in the times that you can't, it does block for 3.
Okay, this card did not make my list. I just thought that it'd be way too hard. For the same reason I didn't put the tome on my list. Getting to those higher combat chains, and this one's even more specific where it needs this very specific card to be on the combat chain to be fulfilled. It seemed a little bit too niche to be a powerful card on my list. However, I'm open to being wrong, and I definitely agree that when you are doing the thing in this card's case, it is extremely powerful.
I do want to add that with Fi specifically, it is quite easy to set up 2 Phoenix Flames if you have gotten through 2 in your deck. On 1 turn, you can just end your turn by activating Fi's ability and arsenaling the Phoenix Flame if you don't particularly need it for that turn. And then if you draw this on the turn where you have a Phoenix Flame in Arsenal, it's very easy to play the one in Arsenal and get a second one back with Fi's ability to turn this card on.
And I think with a card like Mask of the Pouncing Lynx to tutor it up as well might actually push it over to that power level. It just wasn't a card that I was necessarily thinking of at the time, but after hearing your explanation and then hearing you say the words tutor for it, it kind of clicked in my mind that there are going to be more ways than I initially thought to enable this combo, so I could definitely see it being one of the top 10 most powerful cards now.
Okay, so what was your number 2?
My second most powerful card is Double Strike. So Double Strike is a ninja attack action that has 0 cost, 1 power, it's a red, majestic, 2 block. When Double Strike Chain Link resolves, banish it. You may play it as combat chain. If you do, it loses this ability. Go again. So this card is everything ninja wants to be doing, and I expect it to be a 3 of in every ninja deck for all of time. It is a 1 card. In 1 card, you are getting 2 combat chain links every time out of it, which is very powerful effects like Mask of Momentum, Katsu's ability where if one of these 2 hits, he can banish a card out of his hand and tutor for what he wants to start setting up for his combo on the future chain links, as well as in Fi's case, it builds the chain links where Rupture wants to be played on chain link 4 or greater, where this card already gets you 2 combat chain links in 1 card already. So this effect is just everything that Ninja wants to be doing and everything I expect Ninja will always want to be doing for the rest of time. So that's why it's the second most powerful card on my list.
This card did not make my list. I think that it being at its core a 0 for 2 with Go Again, that does help enable your hat and your Katsu triggers and all this other stuff, it doesn't quite make up for this card being so far below rate at 0 for 2, in my opinion.
Is Kodachi very far below rate?
Kodachi is fine, but they are your weapon, and you do end up with 1 resource loading after Kodachi, which lets you play powerful 1-cost attacks.
So this is a 0-cost Kodachi, which you don't have to sink any resources to at first.
Right, but you're spending a card, whereas for Kodachis, you're spending 2/3 of a blue pitch. So Kodachis are a third of a card more efficient than this.
All right, I can see why you wouldn't rate it as highly as I am, but I think given that if we look at just how powerful all the rupture effects are in this set, as well as how often Ninja wants to be getting to these later combat chain links, I think this will be a 3 of in every Ninja deck for the rest of time. I could be wrong, but just reading it and the fact that it's a, I guess, generic Ninja attack just makes it seem like this card is basically the staple of the class in my mind now until I'm proven wrong.
One thing that I think may cause this card to see less play than you're expecting is that a lot of Phi's cards care specifically about having Draconic chain links. This does give you 2 chain links, but those are not Draconic, so it won't work with both his hero ability or his weapon. There may be a way to build Phi that is not playing any of these cards that care about Draconic chain links specifically or don't care about them very much. But I think that the fact that this card doesn't work with any of those and is below rate makes it likely that it won't see play in Phi.
So you don't think any cards with Rupture will be played in Phi?
I'm not saying that cards with Rupture won't be played in Phi. I think that the amount of cards you will play that care about Draconic chain links has to be quite low for you to include this card. And I think a lot of the cards that care about Draconic chain links are very powerful.
That's fair. I guess maybe I wasn't necessarily factoring that into Phi explicitly caring about Draconic chain links, more so overvaluing like the Rupture effects of 4 or greater, but I guess we'll have to see. So what is your number 1 most powerful card, Michael?
My most powerful card from the set is Invoke Chromai. This is a 0-cost Draconic Illusionist action invocation, and it transforms target Ash you control into Chromai, has go again, and it blocks for 3. And Chromai says, once per turn, when Chromai attacks or leaves the arena, gain 1 action point. It has 3 attack and 2 health. And this card, I think, does everything that Dromai is going to want to do. Having that extra action point insulates you against both poppers and allows you to play multiple attacks that don't have go again at the end of your combat chain if all of your dragons do not get popped by Phantasm. And the fact that it's a 0-cost for a 3/2 dragon means often it is going to be 0-cost attack for 3, and then your opponent's gonna have to send 2 damage at it to kill it, which is just a 5 for 0, which is a great rate on its own, even before you count the action point that it's generating.
This card did not make my list. I thought we were going to agree on the dragon. I'm so disappointed that we disagree on the most powerful dragon. I was like, we're going to do it. We're going to agree on a card. We waited till the end, and we're finally going to agree on an evaluation. And here we are, still completely worlds apart on the evaluation of this card. I just don't see it. I think this card's fine. It's a fine effect, getting your action point back, just ultimately mitigating the inherent weakness built into the dragon in this set. Especially if we look at a card like Passing Mirage, which is going to be a staple blue in the deck, where it's not allowing your dragon illusionist attacks to have that Phantasm effect. Sure, it's going to have Spectre, so your opponent can't attack it, but then they're wasting their whole turn popping this Passing Mirage aura, whereas this card can kind of just be popped, blocked, or killed, and you're kind of just right back to square one again anyways. Sure, you have your action point back, but I guess it's hard to envision you casting this card, playing this card, having it be popped, and then having other meaningful things to do on your turn past that.
The fact that it costs 0 is why I rated this card so highly. Zero cost go again really enables Dromai to do her things, and this just plays really well on that and also mitigates the vulnerabilities of Phantasm.
Okay, I can see that. I guess we'll have to see. So my most powerful card is the Majestic Dragon that did not make your list and instead is on my list. It is Invoke Tumultai. Invoke Tumultai is a red Majestic, 3 block. It costs 5, which admittedly is a lot, but I think there's going to be ways for Dromai to get to that, but we'll talk about that later. It's a legendary, so you may only have 1 Invoke Tumultai in your deck. Transform target Ash you control into Tumultai, go again. And if we look at Tumultai is a 5 power Draconic Illusionist Dragon ally with 5 life. Whenever Tumultai attacks a hero, reveal the top 2 cards of your deck. If 1 or more red cards are revealed this way, put that many -1 counters on equipment they control. Then, if it has 0 block, destroy it. So this card is essentially create Tumultai, look at the top 2 cards. Unlike Dominia downside, where it's just the random flip of the top card has to be red, this one's looking at the top 2 cards. So it dramatically reduces the fail rate on this card right off the bat. And then this card just blows up Feindel Spring Tunic. It blows up a Rampart of the Ram's Heart. It blows up Crown of Seeds. It blows up so many pieces of equipment because pieces of equipment actually can't get to -1 defense. They will stay at 0 defense if they go below that threshold. There's no such thing in Flesh and Blood as negative defense because that just doesn't make sense. It's how would you block for a negative amount? Would you take more damage after the combat chain resolves? So once you push things past below 0, anything that has 0 just gets blown up immediately. And then anything with 1 block, the 2 that come to mind right off the top of my head are Faendal Spring Tunic and Spellbound Creepers. Those are just gone as soon as this card attacks one time. And even if you have the popper, even if you kill it on your next turn, it's too late. It's already snagged a critical piece of your equipment that's just gone for the rest of the game. So that's why I rated this card so highly, is just because the disruption of just being able to just snag a piece of equipment, especially imagine this card coming down on turn 0, Michael. Imagine you're on the play, you have your Faendal Spring Tunic sitting there nice and pretty, and they just blow up your Faendal Spring Tunic on turn 0 of the game. That's insane. That's an insane effect, and I can't believe this card did not make your list.
It does sound really powerful when you put it like that. I do think that it is going to be harder to play this card than that. I think this card will have times when it is very powerful and wins you the game on the spot.
On turn 0. Turn 0.
I think that there are other cards that do that I also do not think highly because they are very high variance. Like if you play a library on turn 0, it almost always wins you the game. I think, again, costing 5 is a lot, and yeah, that's all. But I could see this card actually being pretty good. I kind of imagined Dominia would be the best because of how much easier costing 4 is to hit than 5. Like this costing 1 whole extra card if you only have 1 blue in your hand is a lot. I think you could be right. I actually wrote a note before we started that I'm the least confident on my Dromite card evaluations because these dragons are so much different from anything we've evaluated in this game, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they play. It's also really interesting that my number 1 card is a dragon and your number 1 card is a dragon, and both of our dragons did not make the other person's list. I think we have a lot to learn about how the dragons will actually play and what actually makes for a powerful dragon and what Dromite decks even look like going forward, because I honestly have no idea.
Yeah, I can absolutely agree with that. And specifically, I think there's a lot of downside with these dragons and the fact that your opponents get their on-hit triggers after they're, hit. But I think it might take for Prism to rotate out for Dromite to really shine, because especially those Heralds hitting, getting all the Herald effects, the Card and Soul, and just being huge rates that are always going to kill your dragons in and of themselves just seems like a beating for Dromite to deal with. But given that Prism is so close to rotating out, I think we'll know sooner than later. Anyways, but I really think Dromite will shine and have her day in the furnace sooner than later.
I like that. Her day at the furnace. Getting your Tumultai Herald of Erudition sounds awful, though.
It does seem not great where you did it. You blew up their Phantasmal Footsteps, their Spring Tunic, or their Vestige of Soul, and then they just draw 2 cards, beat you down with Heralds anyways. Like, I didn't need this equipment anyways, idiot.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've talked about our top 10 list, do you just want to talk about our overall threats about the legendary equipment in the set, Michael?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, well, let's start out with Flamescale Furnace. Flamescale Furnace is a legendary piece of draconic equipment. It is a chest piece. It has 2 block value. Once per turn instant, 1 resource. Gain a resource for each red card in your pitch zone. Activate this ability only if you flayed a red card this turn. Temper, so that means it can block for 3 total value before it blows up. So off of its first block, it'll go to 1 block, and then if you block with it again, it goes away. What are your thoughts on Flamescale Furnace, Michael?
I think this card is going to be quite good in Fi, and it wouldn't surprise me if Dromite plays it, but it also wouldn't surprise me if Dromite plays Tunic due to having so many powerful 1-cost cards and not really wanting to pitch a card a lot of turns. The fact that this card blocks for 2 and has Temper, ninjas historically have played very short games, sometimes even going as far as to play Heart and Crosstrap over Tunic in some matchups because their games are short enough that it is hard to get enough value out of your Tunic. I think this card just being a block 3 total in those ninja decks will be quite powerful.
I agree. I think it's going to be mostly the temper effect that's going to draw you to this card over Faendal Spring Tunic, given that these aggressive draconic decks, especially in Fi's case, aren't really going to want to block with their cards in hand a lot of the time. Getting any block value out of your equipment is going to be a huge boon for that class.
I don't think the ability will come up very often. I think I'd expect it to be relevant like every few games. It probably comes up once. So most of its power, I think, is just in the block value.
So the next legendary piece of equipment is going to be Coronet Peak. Do you want to read Coronet Peak, Michael?
Yeah, it is an ice equipment head. It blocks for 2. It has Blade Break, so when you block with it once, it's destroyed at the end of the combat chain. Then it has an action, costs 3 resources. Target hero discards a card unless they pay 1. So this card blocks for 2, which is not unheard of on headpieces. We have Arcanite Skullcap already, and we also were getting a new generic Block 2 hat with Crown of Providence this set, which we'll get to after this. So the Block 2 value isn't amazing, but it's nice to have. And then the action of pay 3 resources to make target hero discard a card unless they pay 1 is nice to have, and there will be times that you use this effect. Most commonly, it will be used against heroes that particularly like to play 4 or 5 card hands and also do not have anything they can do with the resources on your turn. So essentially, they'll have to pitch a whole card to pay for this. It's noteworthy this does not have Go Again, so it's worse than Winter's Bite Blue, but it will still, the activated ability will be good in some spots still.
And I see there being times where, you've spent your hand blocking or playing a lot of cards on your opponent's turn at instant speed due to the wizard's ability. Then you just keep back 1 to 2 blues in your hand that you couldn't necessarily use or didn't want to use on your opponent's turn when you were playing at instant speed. You go back to your turn, you just activate Coronet Peak, arsenal your other blue, pass back.
Like you were saying with the Arsenal of the Blue, I think this will most likely see play in Icelander. I don't think Lexi or Oldheim, either of them are particularly interested in it, just because their hats are so powerful with what they're trying to do. Oldheim with his Crown of Seeds and Lexi with her New Horizon.
Yeah, I think those headpieces are particularly better for those heroes than Coronet Peak, but who knows what future Ice heroes will look like, and it's definitely going to see play in Icelander.
Up next, we have Crown of Providence. It is a generic equipment head. It blocks for 2 and has Blade Break. And when you defend with Crown of Providence, you may put a card from your hand or arsenal on the bottom of your deck. If you do, draw a card.
I'm a little salty I spent so much money on Arcanite Skullcaps now, if I'm being completely honest, now that this card exists.
Yeah, I think this card is probably better than Arcanite Skullcap in most decks. The flexibility of being able to filter a card is worth so much, as we talked about with Sink Below in our top 10 episode.
Right, and so it's basically, do you value the 1 extra block and this awkward Arcane Barrier ability, which does have its upside and is kind of useful in particularly against the Rosetta Thorn Runeblade matchups. Maybe that's where Arcanite Skullcap still shines a little bit brighter, but I think just especially as a generic headpiece, Crown of Providence and the ability to filter that card, like you said, and as we say, and we will always keep saying for as long as there are cards in your hand that aren't the best card in your deck or exactly what you need at that moment, that filtering your hand effect is incredibly valuable on this piece of equipment.
Yeah, for sure. And also being able to arsenal a random card at some point in the game, knowing that if you don't find a good time to use it, like we were talking about with the Tome of the Firebrand, being able to get rid of a card that gets stuck in your arsenal is also a very nice added on bonus to this card.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a kind of a subtle thing that I think a lot of people will look over, but it's definitely also a very powerful effect when you need it. Next, we have the weirdest piece of legendary equipment to me, which is Ghostly Touch. Ghostly Touch is an illusionist equipment arm with 0 block. Whenever an illusionist attack you control is destroyed by Phantasm, put a haunt counter on Ghostly Touch. Once per turn action, remove a haunt counter from Ghostly Touch. Until end of turn, this becomes an illusionist ally with Phantasm, base power and health equal to the number of haunt counters on it. Once per turn action, 3 resources, attack, go again. What do you think of this card, Michael? It's really weird.
I just realized this becomes an ally with health, even though it only stays an ally on your turn. So it is possible that you could kill it with maybe arcane damage on your opponent's turn if your opponent activates this. This card is very interesting to me. If a lot of your illusionist attacks are being destroyed by Phantasm, then this will grow quite large, but this also has Phantasm, so it will be very vulnerable after it's grown. I'm not really sure where this will slot in.
To me, it just seems like this weird finisher where you just pretend you don't have arm pieces for the whole game until you get to the end of the game, and you're kind of in this scrappy mode where you're spending 2 or 3 cards blocking. Particularly in Dromai's case, a lot of your dragons popped because that's going to be the primary way that this gets built in Dromai. In Prism, I don't think it's going to get super big or be super relevant to the fact that I think Ironhide Gauntlet still might just be her default arms, because I really don't see this becoming greater than 2, maybe 3 power over the course of the game. But with Dromai, with all of her dragons being popped and triggering this, maybe this can get to like 6, 7, 8, 9 power at the end of the game, where you're just removing the counter from it, coming in with this very strong illusionist ally, and your opponent's already used a lot of their poppers or their higher power effects on your dragons earlier in the game, because they're only going to have so many 6 power attacks, and it's going to be something that you can keep track of, especially on second cycle. And that's really where this card's going to shine. But that seems very niche for a legendary piece of equipment.
Yeah, what you said about second cycle makes a lot of sense as the main use case for this, because if you are getting a bunch of stuff popped in the first cycle and coming in with this for like 6 or 7 on the second cycle when you know they don't have a popper. That actually sounds very powerful. And with what the current arm situation is for illusionists, where they have Dreamweavers and generic commons, while it is kind of niche and isn't wholly applicable and always your go-to choice, it is nice that they are getting something that is quite powerful in some spots.
Right, especially in Dromai, like I said. In Prism, I really don't see this being an effect that's worth it in the late game even still, because like I said, you're just normally not having that many heralds popped over the course of a game, so its effect still isn't even that relevant, but maybe it is still more relevant than the 2 life, I guess. The other thing that really pops off the card to me is the fact that it needs 3 resources to attack. That's kind of a big ask. I guess when we're getting into second cycle, when blues are a little bit more readily available, once you've already pitched them once, you're seeing them again on your second cycle, that downside's maybe not as high, but it's still kind of a tall ask for 3 resources to attack.
Yeah, you really need to get to like 5 or 6 haunt counters on this before it's even like remotely efficient to do. Because if you have 4 counters on it and you activate it, it removes a counter and then it becomes this 3 cost, 3 power attack, which with Go Again, so it's not that bad, but it doesn't seem particularly strong, especially when it has this Phantasm vulnerability itself.
It's only that one time that it gets that 3 power, because then the next one will be 2 power and then 1 power, and then it's not anything anymore again. And the other thing I was overlooking was I was assuming that all of your dragons are just popped, where if your opponent starts to get afraid of this, maybe they just take a hit from a dragon or block it, and then they just kill it naturally. So it's also very much in your opponent's purview to control how big this card gets, considering there are those 2 ways to kill dragons, both with poppers and just attacking them naturally.
One final strike against this card that I want to bring up because it is particularly relevant in this set now that we have more ways to kill equipment is this is an equipment that doesn't do anything until near the end of the game. So if at any point this card is getting threatening, maybe your opponent has a way to blow it up also through equipment destruction. And they have most of the game to find that.
And I think equipment destruction maybe won't ever be super prevalent, but I think there will be more and more ways to deal with 0 block equipment as time goes on, given that we've seen just how powerful they can be with Crown of Seeds.
Okay. Moving on to some arms that I think will be quite good. We have Tiger Stripe Shuko. It's a ninja equipment arms. It blocks for 2 and has blade break. And it says the second attack action card with 2 or less base power you play each turn has +1 attack or +1 power, and damage that would be dealt by this cannot be prevented. So this card is worth 1 damage on every turn that you play 2 or more attack actions with base power of 2 or less. And then when you're done using it, it also blocks for 2. So over the course of a game, if you're activating this effect half the time, half of your turns, then it is worth 1 damage for every 2 turns the game goes on, +2 block at the end. That's just very strong for a piece of equipment.
As well as also being relevant against Crown of Seeds, where that extra push can't just be mitigated by a Crown of Seeds activation. Let's say you just pitch to activate Rampart off the first 1 power attack, and then the second 1 power attack is coming in, and you're like, okay, well, I'll just use my other floating resource now to use Crown of Seeds. Well, you can't with this second push for the power because the damage can't be prevented. So it kind of gives ninjas a little bit more play into Guardian, which they sorely needed.
Yeah, Oldheim used to beat up Katsu pretty badly, and this piece of equipment will really help with that. It's also very easy to turn on in Phi specifically because the Phoenix Flames, you're expecting to get 1 Phoenix Flame back every turn for the most part. And so you only really need to play 1 real card with 2 or less power. And then the Phoenix Flame will be that second one to trigger this. Yeah. So Kodachis don't work that well with this.
Yeah, because importantly, it doesn't trigger off of any attack. So the second Kodachi won't be pumped with 1+1 power. It's only attack action cards.
Yes, it is.
Okay, moving on to our final piece of legendary equipment. It's once again Wizard's Time to Shine with Alluvion Constellus. The first time Alluvion Constellus prevents arcane damage each turn, if it has less than 4 energy counters, you may put an energy counter on it. Instant. Remove 2 energy counters from Alluvion Constellus. The next staff ability you activate this turn costs 3 resources left. Arcane Barrier 1, no block. This is a weird card, Michael. So what staff are we looking to activate with this card first and foremost? Because I think that's like the first question we want to be asking with this card. What staff are we getting the most value out of when we're even jumping through this hoop?
So there's actually 2 staffs that... I guess technically 3 staffs that you can get reasonably efficient value out of, but I think the main 2 are going to be Kraken's Aether Vein
It's once per turn, instant, 3 resources, deal 1 arcane damage to target opposing hero, draw a card for each arcane damage dealt this way.
So spending 3 resources on this effect is a lot, but if you get to do it for free, that's pretty powerful, and you can do it at surprising times, or it's always available as long as you have 2 counters on this chess piece.
Okay, and what's the other one?
The other one is Waning Moon, which is the new staff that Icelander brought this set. It says once per turn instant, 2 resource cost. Deal 2 arcane damage to target hero. If it's not your turn, instead deal 3 damage to them. Activate this ability only if you've played a non-attack action card this turn.
This one seems more appealing because of Kraken Aether being only dealing that 1 damage and being easily blocked by any random resource or card. It's very easy to mitigate, it's very easy to play around. So even playing that effect for free doesn't seem that powerful to me. Although I guess a lot of the time Icelander will try to be using this effect once your opponent's just spent all the resources for the turn, so maybe I'm underselling it a little bit. But just always being able to push for that 3 arcane damage on their turn also seems very powerful and a good way to just push a lot of damage.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact that this card with Arcane Barrier is just generating, anytime you use this Arcane Barrier effect, you're generating these energy counters that in turn are turning into resources, which in turn turns into damage. That's just going to be pretty powerful in the matchups that you are able to block arcane damage with this. So in case Wizards weren't able to beat up Runeblades enough, now with this new chess piece that is going to be extremely efficient to block their arcane damage, it's kind of probably going to mean Icelander is very good against the Runeblades.
And I think this card makes the Wizard Mirror the realest 4D 3000. I'm just not smart enough. I probably need like 5 more graduate degrees in math and strategic planning and game theory in order to effectively realize the full potential of this card in a Wizard Mirror between the Stormstrider's Arcane Barrier that you have in this. So you just have Arcane Barrier 3 across those 2 pieces of equipment if you need it. And this awkward tension of, well, if I hit them with this arcane damage effect and then they build their Constellus up another counter and then they activate their weapon at instant speed, and then I don't have the resources in order to mitigate that arcane damage, but if I do have the resources to mitigate that damage, I can activate my Constellus to get my resources back, and then I can threaten my weapon. It's just like, oh my, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I think it's going to make Wizard Mirrors very interesting because this card is both very powerful and there's a lot you can do to play around it to try to like make sure you aren't getting your stuff arcane buried by this when you don't want to. So I think the skill cap in Wizard Mirrors because of this card will go up by a reasonable amount, which is something that's definitely good for the game in my opinion.
You would think that, given that you're Michael Hamilton, but as a medium tier pleb like myself, I want more variance. How about we, except for not random discard, we could put more variance that's not random discard. I'm all for it. Okay, any other final thoughts you have on Uprising, Michael?
So that was our constructed set review. I'm also very much looking forward to playing Limited in this format. From my small sample size of games, it has been very enjoyable and very interesting. So I look forward to playing more.
Yeah, the world better watch out as the 31st ranked Limited player, Roger Bodee, is going to be back on the scene grinding Limited matchups again. So you better watch out there. I'm coming for you. But thanks again, everybody. And during your next Flesh and Blood match, always remember, mind your manners. Have a good one.